It's a little bigger from up here. Okay. Hi, I'm Claire. The proposition that I'm arguing is that the two-party system produces significant disadvantages to our democracy. So basically what the two-party system means is that there's two major political parties that run the government. So in our case, it'd be Democrats and Republicans. The three supporting claims I'm going to use to support my argument are, one, that the two-party system encourages closed-mindedness of its citizens, two, that the two-party system perpetuates the power of the parties and makes them stronger, and three, that the government is less effective because of the two-party system. So going back to my original point, that it creates closed-mindedness of the citizens, a poll by pollingreport.com said that 44% of Americans identified as Democrats and 44% identified as Republicans, meaning that our nation is literally split right down the middle, one way or the other. This isn't necessarily bad unless you start to think about people who are on the more radical side of each side. So another poll done by Pew Research said that 36% of Republicans and 27% of Democrats thought the ideals of the opposing side were literally a threat to the nation, which means that they actually think the country would be in danger if someone from the opposing party got elected as president, which is actually starting to kind of change how we define the term Democrat and Republican. A poll by CNN said that 52%, so over half of people who identify as Democrat, said that they didn't stand necessarily for an issue in particular, but instead simply stood against Trump. So that just means that because they disagree with a certain person in a political office, that they identify as the opposing party. So instead of being a Democrat because you believe in a certain set of ideals or certain political issues, it means that you disagree with someone who identifies as a Republican. You couldn't possibly identify as a Republican if you hate someone who also identifies as that. So then my second point was that the two-party system perpetuates the political power of the parties. So they actually give them powers that make them stronger and kind of ice out like third-party candidates and making voting a little bit unfair. One way they do this is through gerrymandering, which is like a term that most people have heard of. It basically just means that you redraw boundary lines around voting areas to favor one party or class. So if one voting area was predominantly Democratic, you would redraw the line so that it would be predominantly Republican. What this does is it makes votes count for less, and it also completely ices out third-party candidates. Another thing that the government gives control of the parties is the primaries, the conventions, and the electoral college. So because they have control, the Democrats and Republicans have control over all of that, again, it ices out third-party candidates. And then my third argument is that the government is actually less effective because of the two-party system. So we as citizens prefer what's called a divided government, which means that the president belongs to one party and then the other controls either one or both of the houses. And we like this because it kind of protects our civil liberties as citizens with like a checks and balances system. Only 3 presidents ever have had to not deal with a divided government. But what this does is it sets up a government that actually works against itself. So when one person is trying to pass a law, the other side is kind of arguing against them, and it creates this like black and white, one way or the other mentality that keeps things from, keeps legislature from passing laws. So through those 3 points, I believe that the two-party system is a hindrance on our democracy rather than a help.
Okay, Claire, the strength of the argument is the clarity of the proposition and the secondary claims. You've got a very straightforward, clear set of points that are related to one another, and if your proof was consistent, I think you would be able to convince people about the problems with the two-party system. I think you kind of explain your assumptions pretty well also as you get to each of those points. Now, proving those, I think, is a little bit more difficult. On the first point, I thought you did a pretty good job suggesting with some statistical information, especially about opinion polls, about how people feel about the other party or how the country is divided between their political identification, that there is certainly some sense of not trusting the other side, suspicion that goes on there, and maybe the idea of polarization is increased a little bit. The notion that that's a threat to democracy, I think, needs to be elaborated on. How does that create a problem? Does it, for example, your third point says that it prevents the government's less effective. Does it stop the government from solving problems? Are there crises that haven't been addressed? Have we put off dealing with issues because of the political polarization that's going on there? I think there are probably good examples of things that you could show that are connected to that, but there's not really any inferential leap that's going on there. We just get the description of the polarization process. The second point, I think you were a little confused in the way you described gerrymandering. That's probably just you probably inverted a word or two here or there. But I think most people understand the concept of gerrymandering. If they've taken a government class, they, I'm sure, have encountered that idea before. That's a pretty good illustration. How it ices out third parties, though, is not particularly clear. You don't have any examples of any viable third parties that are going on, and I think that would have been something that's helpful. If third parties, for instance, are prohibited from getting on the ballot because of the political rules that are in place, or they have less access to resources as a consequence of some of those things, I think those would be maybe better or stronger proof on that second point. And then on the third point, you kind of say people prefer divided government. Well, isn't that what a democracy is, what the people prefer? So why is that a potential problem here? This is, like I said before, I think you need to show that there are problems that we could deal with that we don't deal with because of the political division. I'm not sure that you do anything other than say, well, the other side's going to stop them. Like you said, there have only been 3 presidents that haven't had that sort of thing. So it sounds to me like we've been reasonably effective for most of the time with that divided government. If there is something in particular that's going on right now that the divided government is preventing us from addressing, that would be great. But on the other hand, the current example, we don't have a divided government. The Republicans are in control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and we still have problems getting things done. That I'm not sure that that's a partisan issue, and that's related to the two-party system. It may be related to other issues that, like the extremists that you mentioned in that first point. So I'm not sure that you're attributing the source of the problem to the right culprit, the two-party system, or is it the extremities within the parties that are producing those problems? I think you do a nice job speaking to the audience as well, but you've got some more time that you could have elaborated on and clarified some of those points. All right, thank you.